And so in those situations, they can now learn where they need to situationally adjust their leadership for what the situation is. But they have to be willing to take that knowledge and engage in their behavior to do that. We're moving Gallup Strengths across the entire organization this fall. So every team member will have an understanding of what's your 34 themes and how do those play, not only here at work, but how do they play through your life, right?
Chris, welcome to Amplify, the Leadership Student 2.0 podcast. How are you?
Yeah, great. Glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on and glad to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you. As you, I think, responded to, I've reached out to HR leaders and other folks who are at senior executive level positions out across a variety of industries to have these conversations about leadership and also some conversations about what you're seeing in the talent acquisition space. But I want to start off specifically with the topic of leadership and maybe get a assessment from you as to what you've seen on the landscape as it relates to leadership development, whether or not you feel like we as a culture and sort of the industry that you're in are paying enough attention to the idea of leadership development, especially among young leaders. What are you seeing on the landscape?
Yeah, what a rich question. And I tell you, we could probably talk about this for the entire time, right? We always say, our leaders have to go first. And when our leaders get stronger, everybody gets stronger. So, my answer, not surprising, is we can't spend enough time in this camp. And I think, organizations that are getting it right are really recognizing the need to have formal programs, to have emerging leader programs, to have programs that are connecting their leaders to learn from each other and allowing us to think about how we're slowing down to build the next generation of leaders inside of our organizations. Because I know just within our team member base and even in our local community and globally, this idea of having somebody in the workplace that truly cares about you, that sees your value, that recognizes the value of work that you're doing has never been more important than what people are facing today and with just all that's swirling around us.
Yeah, I'm glad you described it that way, specifically around sort of paying attention to the development of individuals. Why do you think we had it? First of all, let me make an assertion, see if you agree with it. I don't know that that's always been the case in industry. I don't know that that there's a high degree of managers and people who are in leadership positions who understand that the focus should be on developing people. I have always stated myself that like the primary role of a leader is actually to develop people on their teams. Like that's your number one goal. Yes, you'll hit your KPIs. Yeah, you'll hit your metrics and all of the things that you're responsible for doing as a team leader. But I would also say, and again, assert that I don't know that that's a firm understanding across the board for most leaders and managers. Why do you think that's the case? First of all, do you agree with that? And why is that the case?
Yeah, I think it generally is the case. I look back at my career from working up through manufacturing, union environments, non-union, nonprofit, consulting firm, and then where I am now in a credit union space. And I think there are pieces that are more culturally centric and about who is really paying attention to that. But I think people for a long time, look at what we still have for a long time, even the curriculum and MBA programs talked about how do I manage strategy, but it didn't talk about culture, right? And leadership development happens through culture. It happens through the awareness that, behavior always precedes result, right? Nothing happens unless we choose to do something in a certain way. And the choice to do that can either lift, bring inclusion, make people feel valued, that now they're willing to give more, that you just don't have to keep putting out, another fancy carrot every time, like, hey, give me another widget, here's another dollar, give me another widget. But they do it because it's intrinsically motivated with them versus every extrinsic motivation factor I need to give because people believe in what you're doing. And so I think it's probably a time that people are organizations, like I said before, that are getting it right, are starting to really understand that's the difference in the equation. Those that are continuing to push for results may be successful in their own results, that if they only push that way, like they don't think about how are we asking people to behave to get to the result, they'll get to a result. But to me, it's always the game of missed opportunity. How much greater could it be if the hearts of your people were connected in a way that allowed them to bring the best out of their innovative thinking?
Yeah, awesome. You said something in your first answer that I wanted to circle back on around making sure that you absolutely prioritize the existence of these programs to develop leaders. My observation has been, especially in a challenging economic environment like the one that we're in right now, is that leadership programs are oftentimes like the first thing that gets cut when budgets get strained and when organizations decide that they need to lean out their expenses. And I'm wondering why you think it is so easy for organizations to do that. And I think that you actually, again, in your second answer there, nailed the reason why I think we should be paying like hyper focused and paying attention to the subject of leadership development, because there's a missed opportunity there that I'm not sure that everyone recognizes that they're actually leaving money on the table by not investing in
Yeah. Yeah.
leadership.
We're big Gallup fans here inside of Fox Communities Credit Union, and one of the things that they will tell you is that if you slow down to help develop people's strengths, you're 5 times likely to have them be more productive in the workplace, right?
Love it.
And so those understanding that, like from a financial ROI, is incredibly important to this journey, right? And so I
Right.
think sometimes those programs get cut because they're easy. Maybe I'm working with an external consultant completely, and it's easy for me to say, we're just not going to do that, right? I've always worked with how do I take things from the outside, but how do we love them from the inside out, right? So those programs become culturally integrated into just the way we do things around here.
Yeah.
And your talent management systems are set up to support those interactions and those connections. And how can you do that being fiscally responsible to the organization, but equally how you can do it in a way that continues to have what we'd say our intentional culture come. But I think people miss that connection. And we make it so easy that we go completely external maybe on those programs. It's easy to cut that. It's just a budget line cut,
Right.
and I'm going to bring this knowledge in. But if I integrate those programs into how I deliver on our cultural commitment to our team, right? It just becomes those leaders find value in those programs, and they see the results of what happens in the hearts of our people and how we care for our members, that they just become the last thing that we're going to take away because we
Yeah.
see the value set. But HR professionals have to move out of the bucket of, compliance to all this other stuff to really understanding the journey of intentional culture and being able to help their fellow leaders and executive suites understand the value and have their buy-in because they see the difference it's making in their people.
Yeah. Has HR always been sort of the home of people development from a leadership perspective? Has it always been in the HR lane? And if so, one, it strikes me as I continue to have these conversations that the HR leadership roles are highly complex because you're dealing with so much. You're dealing with the employee through their entire life cycle, right? Getting them into the organization, developing them, their potential exits from the organization. It's like you touch them at every phase of their development. Is HR the right place for this kind of thing? And if so, how difficult is it for you to sort of manage all of that in terms of the employee life cycle?
Well, here my title is Chief People Officer, right? So it encompasses our HR team, it encompasses our learning and development team and our OD team,
Right.
as well as internal communications. So those things move in a different way. So, the HR bucket is going to depend, obviously, as you know, upon the size of the organization, the capacity of what's going. But here's what I would say. I think people in this space, and what I mean from sort of my viewpoint of the profession, that are doing the work well, understand that they have to walk beside our leaders. Like I can never take the place of what the relationship is between one of our team members and their direct leader, and never should I, right? That isn't
Right.
my role. My role is to help create the infrastructure in the organization that puts really cool tools that add value sets into helping enrich discussions, that help enrich resources that our leaders can connect our team members into on their own growth and development journey, and to make them stronger. My role is to help create leadership development programs that help stretch our leaders to be stronger and more effective in what they want their legacy of leadership to be, and to help understand, how that works. But, we have to bring the infrastructure, but we have to walk beside our leaders and never mistake that the strongest relationship always has to be and valued the most between that leader and that direct team member. And we are just a steward of helping ensure the right, the right tools, the right things are sitting on the coffee table, that as they chat, they can pull them off, that they find value in that enriching discussion.
Is there anything that stands out to you in terms of that toolkit or tool set that you offer to your line leaders that you have seen really, really be helpful in terms of nurturing those relationships?
Yeah, I think a couple things, I would point to. We've really worked hard on two of our coaching models inside of the organization, and they have to work hand in hand. So, we ditched our old traditional performance reviews back in January of 22 and just said, we're going to stop doing it. We're not going to put you in a number. We're not going to put you in a box. And we really introduced two codependent models. One is our daily performance accountability model that focuses on how do we start to make sure we have role clarity? How do people know what it is to be successful? When's the last time I even looked at my job description to see if I'm even doing what
what does good look like? I think we missed that a lot.
What does good look like, right? And how do we help those discussions? And so we've spent time in that camp, creating the right career pathing, creating the tool sets around, validation of job descriptions, title alignments. I mean, all the kind of good stuff that you should do there. But more importantly, we've really worked with our leaders about how do you ask the right questions? What does success look like, for you in 3 months, 6 months? What can I do to support you to get there? What are you struggling with? So we do that. We also focused a ton on meaningful recognition. So tool sets that allow us to recognize the value sets of our team and what we're doing, and putting our leaders in the spot to say, thank you for doing that. When you do that, here's why it makes a difference, not just thank you, and we put a ton of resources. We could spend an hour talking about that. But then we've also introduced, tool sets that allow us to think about when people are struggling most, how do we be present with them in that moment to give really good improvement feedback? And we've helped our leaders in a tool set of communication there, where we ask them very often and teach them to talk to expectation observation. Instead of just going into discussions like that where I'm helping somebody grow, or when they're struggling the most and I start to sort of go on a tangent about, hey, you're late all the time, or you never get that right. How do I start with saying, the expectation is, you're here at 8, or the expectation was, you told me that report would be done, by today, and it's not. So now help me understand what happened, right? So those tool sets are really important. And if we have that going on, the second model is all about our growth and development journey, which really gets at this heart with our leaders and all of our team members to how do we slow down twice a year to sit down and ask people what gives you meaning and purpose. If people were to say things that made you proud, what would they say? How does that relate to where you are on your professional or personal journey? And if there's one thing that we can do, that you can do in the next 30, 60, 90 days, just one thing to get closer to wherever that journey wants to take you, what can you do and what can we do to support you? So that's the framework, and that's all held with the cadence of one-on-ones. It's all held with this idea of meaningful check-ins, with people throughout a week that glues those two together. But those tool sets are part of the framework of offering tools up to our leaders and our team to put them in spaces to have much more enriching discussions. And that's made a significant difference on our engagement journey, on just what we're doing. I think even in the essence of, our 88 years of caring for our members, they feel that even more from our people today than they did.
Outstanding. One of the things you mentioned that strikes me is that doesn't come naturally to people is having these conversations. Conversations, especially when it's a leader or a manager to employee, whether the conversations are even just touch points or check-ins, or the really, really difficult conversations when you have to tell someone that they're not, meeting or living up to expectations. And hopefully you've had, the conversations up to that point so it doesn't become a surprise conversation that's being had. But even just having those conversations, it can be a challenge for lots of people. And a lot of it has to do with comfort levels and communicating and how people feel comfortable taking folks on a journey and then really developing trust and being in an environment where both can exchange honestly. Have you seen anything, or are you guys doing anything inventive to ensure that your managers and line leaders understand how to craft those conversations?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with that communication model. So we teach them, how to be direct, specific, and non-punishing. We teach
Hmm.
them and work through what do you do when emergent problems come up and you're in a discussion. Because often, whether I'm a leader who lives in a side that I'm not afraid to challenge, or whether I'm a leader that's more tolerant, depending upon the situation, my behavior can be the same. A person who's very tolerant wants to get out of the discussion because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And the sooner I can get rid of this, I want to get out of here because I don't want to make you feel sad. And the person who's challenging is like, well, why do we need all this emotion? I'm just going to tell you what it is, and we're going to do that, right? But either way, to the team member on the other side, it sort of feels the same. And
Right.
so we spend a lot of time talking about how do you get over that? How do you deal with that? How do you understand your own hardwiring so that, if you're on one side or another, how do you soften it up? And on the other side, how do you learn to bring it up because you care? Like, if we really care about each other, I don't allow you to continue to make mistake after mistake and not spend time to really talk to you about, hey, when you do that, it's just not so good. So let's talk about what we can do differently, in
Right.
this space, right? And so we bring a lot of those discussions forward to our leaders. The other thing that we do is when those discussions are in there, we really ask our leaders, we don't believe in pips that are top down from the top, that you have to solve it. We talk with our leaders to understand that the only person who can change their behavior is that person themselves. And so you have to stop putting yourself in a place that you think you have to have all the answers to absolutely everything. What you have to do is put the ownership where the ownership belongs, which is on that individual. And that's okay to do that. So we do that. And, after multiple discussions that have happened, we actually then have our leaders introduce 3 key questions to somebody who continues to struggle. And we ask them to take time to reflect. We pay them for this time. If they have to do it in overtime, that's fine. But we have 3 questions that we ask them to reflect on. Knowing that this is a continual concern, what are you going to do differently? Because again, only you can change your behavior.
Right. I like
What
that question. Yeah.
Yeah, what can I do as a leader? I'm not going to leave you out on an island. Like, if
Right.
we can do anything as an organization, if we can do anything as your leader, I'm totally willing and open. So you give me anything you got, right? And the
Yep.
third question we ask people at this point is, all the things we've been doing today haven't been changing. So what I need to know is this really what you want to do? Is working here really what you want? Because something's got to change, and only you can do the lifting again to choose
Right.
behavior. So I'm not going to put you through a process that completely only threatens your job all the way down. If this isn't what you want to do, let's just talk about that, and let's either find another spot that could be, or if the best thing is for us to help you find an ease transition to something that you would love to do, you're once a member, always a member with us, right? So how do we be honest about that instead of forcing you through a tiny little way that
Tiny
we
box. Yeah.
know what we need to do? And
Yeah. No, I
so
love it.
tool sets have been extremely helpful, I think, on our journey. It's taken us a while to implement, to figure them all out, but we're starting to see the fruit of that labor come through, and just giving compassion and humanness
Yeah.
back to the system, right?
One of the main things we do here at Apogee when we talk to folks about leadership development is emphasizing the need to understand yourself. In other words, as a leader, who you are. How do you feel about assessments and instruments and things that have been on the market now for many, many decades? There's some great ones out there, as ones historically that people are well aware of. How do you feel about leadership assessments? Do you find them useful? Do you think they're useful to leaders in terms of their own development? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan, but I'll give this caveat. I have, and I'm big, and I'll tell you which ones we use and why we find them of value.
Yeah.
But here's what people have to do. Any one of those assessments that I've worked with, and we work with Gallup, we work with another organization called Right Path out of Atlanta. But what happens in that situation is people need to be willing to take the gift of feedback, right?
Right.
So I can get any one of those assessments, but if an organization that produces that assessment makes the one little fun team event and they never talk about it again, they never integrate it into their talent management strategy, they never bring it back again, We integrate, we've been on a journey with an organization called Right Path that I mentioned. It's at your hardwiring. So whether you take it when you're 9 or 99, it stays the same over the 25 once hopefully our personality develops and we all grow up a bit. But what it allows our leaders to do is gauge how they're hardwired. And so in those situations, they can now learn where they need to situationally adjust their leadership for what the situation is. But they have to be willing to take that knowledge and engage in their behavior to do that. We're moving Gallup Strengths across the entire organization this fall. So every team member will have an understanding of, what's your 34 themes and how do those play not only here at work, but how do they play through your life, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan, but when you get the gift, your leaders, those leaders that choose to take the gift and open that gift and nurture that gift, right? You see amazing things happen. Those that open the gift and close it back up or want to return it, right? Never are going to develop to their full potential.
I'm a big fan as well, and I'm actually surprised at the science that it's able to be crafted in such a way that even with a short number of questions, they do a pretty good job of nailing, an individual's personality's too broad a word, but basically how they show up in these different scenarios. I found them to be almost like a dart, like spot on, and I've taken multiple ones over the course of my career. They all have, I think, something insightful that's basically like, and you sometimes it's like a smack in the face. You have to if you're really reflective, you have to acknowledge these things when they're presented to you. For me, I've been challenged as a professional that sometimes in initial meetings with folks, I can come off as standoffish or unapproachable, right? And that all has to do with me. It's not about the other person. It's incumbent upon me to recognize that and to somehow overcome that, because it can create obstacles in building trust and relationships with people. But these things are super, super, super helpful, and it's good to hear that you're seeing some use for assessments in the work.
Yeah, we bring them back all the time. And one of the things I love is I always pay attention, in our intentional culture model, the symbols, which is language and words, right? For me, that's so important in what you're doing. And I love when I hear our leaders now bring this language into just our discussions about developing their team or even dealing with a result-based issue. And they'll be talking about, God, I'm seeing that, I got my logical brain on right now, and I'm not looking at how that's going to roll out people, but I know that John's really good at thinking about how we're going to roll this out from an emotional standpoint. I better go check in with him, because I might do what I think is really good, but I might lose a lot of people along the way if I don't pay attention. And so you're starting to really see that cross connection, which is really, really powerful for us as well. So I'm thankful for that work.
How early or how late in your career did you have an opportunity to work for or work in close proximity to someone that you thought was an outstanding leader?
Yeah, I've been really blessed. I think, since I've been in my mid-20s, I've been very fortunate. I still don't know how I managed this, but to always be in the C-suite. So I was always, for a long time, I'm now the oldest one sitting in the C-suite, but for a long time, I was the youngest one. And so I had some really great mentors along the way. I worked for an organization called Dunstern Industries. And I remember one day I was really good. Like the HR team I was leading, they were really fine-tuned. We had, back then, I can date myself, we had binders for everything, and everything was organized, and we were awesome. And I remember one day, Dwayne Dunstern, one of the owners, came in and he said, Chris, we love all this that you've done. Like, we didn't have that, and he said, but I think you're missing a point. And the point is, we have to lead with heart. And if we start with that, right, so many other things will transcend. And I thought, oh, shoot, what the heck am I doing, right? Yeah. And so that was really pivotal. And then I had a chance to work for an organization that, along the way, that I really thought this idea of missed opportunity sort of came in. Really great business model, great product line, but you could see that behavior that was allowed to transcend in the organization impacted the lost opportunity all the time, impacted constantly, right? And then I had a chance to go work for Goodwill North Central Wisconsin for over 11 years, and I led their people and culture efforts. And Bob Peterson, who was our chief visionary and storyteller, was really sort of that important pivotal leader that sort of allowed us to be innovative in the people space and do a lot of different things. And I think that journey of sort of transcending through that really left a big imprint on me.
Yeah, good. I want to switch gears a little bit, talk a little bit about the talent recruitment space, which is also space that we occupy here at Apogee. What are you seeing on the landscape? We're in challenging economic times. I'm not even sure how to describe it. We're definitely in a different economic environment at the moment. I've seen, I come from the technology space, and I know that there are lots of folks on the landscape looking for work right now, like people with deep expertise and talent. I also have been reading some rather disturbing reports about new college grads with degrees and all kinds of skill sets are having trouble finding roles in open positions. Are corporations contracting at the moment? Are they sort of, holding their cards to try and see what the next card is going to come out that's being dealt? What are you seeing out there on the landscape?
And I think this is probably really industry specific, don't you? I mean, if I'm dealing with a lot of issues with tariffs, are they on, are they off? And my supply chain is coming from across the seas. I mean, you got to be in a place where you're constantly pausing and saying, where am I going? What am I doing? How are we doing this? I mean, it's
right.
I'm not in manufacturing anymore, and I'm sort of thankful I'm in the financial industry, but, the housing market is an interesting time as well. But, we're seeing a lot of commercial growth, at least here in our place, living here in central Wisconsin as we are, or northeast Wisconsin. So, I mean, we've been doing okay in that space, but I think there's no question that it is a turbulent time of just, we're in places that, we're moving forward. And like you said, in space that there's no roadmap right now to take us on the journey we're on before. So it's all new discovery. So I think, the best thing that organizations can do is be really true to themselves. Where are we at? Where are we at in our, what's our authentic talent brand? What are we doing in this camp? We've been really blessed that, we're at 95% retention, running that very consistently across that. That's probably at least 10%, if not 15% higher than the industry standard. And so, but yet I still have, in our case, we have just shy of 500 team members, and we still have like 25 openings right now because we're growing. We're growing into different markets. We're growing into different areas. We're doing a lot. 64% of every open position we have goes to somebody inside the organization right now, as well. And so part of that is, how are you loving that? But I can definitely see, I ran into somebody who actually did my nails the other day, who has a 4-year degree in business management and struggled to find something she liked. So she went to cosmetology school for a couple of months and did my nails. And I'm like, well, do you like this? Do you want to do more? So it's an interesting time for sure.
Yeah. Any advice to folks? Every once in a while, I get some relatively young listeners. I do a lot of mentoring on the side, and I have some folks who likely listen to the podcast who are out searching for opportunities. Any advice, generally speaking, in terms of how to land these roles?
Right. Yeah, I think the best thing that people can do is not be afraid to assert themselves and market themselves. I think, there was a time where, you post a job and pray, and you had more, tons of people coming through, or maybe on the other end for a long time, it was, I didn't have a lot of candidates. And so it became a lot easier for me. But our ability, particularly our younger team members, to understand that, how you present yourself, what's on your social media, who are you networking with? Have you picked up the phone? Are you involved in LinkedIn? Have you picked up the phone to see who has gone about a path you might be interested in? And just pick up a phone and say, hey, I found you, and I'm really interested in just seeing if you'd be willing to have a cup of coffee with me and have a discussion. I think the way that people are breaking that down has everything to do with relationship connection. And, we're only 7 people away from Kevin Bacon. Well, you might only be 7 people away from your dream job, right? And you just
probably less, yeah.
Yeah, right. Hopefully less, right? And you just have to be willing to, don't be afraid to get out there, and just don't do it on your technology. The people you need to reach obviously are on social media today. You can't sort of not be in certain ways, I think, in the roles that we have to play and connect, but you need to be willing to pick up the phone, and you need to be willing to say, will you have a cup of coffee with me? right? I think that is one of the best things. I've had several discussions with that with recent grads, and I've been honored to do it. And often people won't say no. They're not going to be like, no, I'm not going to help you.
Right.
People generally don't do that.
Absolutely.
Do,
no,
I don't want to talk.
Yeah, no, I tell people all the time, especially the young folks I mentor, to reach out to people, and you'd be surprised how many people would be willing to give you a 15, 20-minute virtual chat, virtual coffee, and just have a conversation with you. And you just get to ask them whatever you want. And exactly like you said, how did you get to where you are? What path did you take? What advice do you have for me? That kind of thing. And people always want to give advice and talk about themselves. So give them the opportunity to do it.
Right. And then always end it with, who else should I talk to?
Yep. There you
Who's
go.
next on my list? Like, who else would be helpful? It's sort of what we tell people as they're out looking, we're more seasoned and you're looking for a new opportunity, or it's using those same skills but teaching it to our people, that are coming out of our schools, and how do we help them make those connections?
Right. Very good. Any final thoughts on the topic of leadership?
Well, probably many thoughts. That's a big question.
Yeah, big question. But if you had to give someone like one or two bits of advice as it relates to their own personal leadership development, might be a better question. Like what 2 bits of advice would you give someone about developing yourself as a leader?
I think one of the things that I would say would be recognize that developing your leadership is one of the most core competencies of any role you're in. And it just doesn't come by happen circumstance. I mean, you really need to be intentional about understanding that if you are interested in moving forward in an organization, if you're interested in really making a difference in the lives of those that surround you, that your ability to recognize that you can be good at any skill set you want. You can be the best one at project management. You can be the best engineer. You can be the best at all of that technically. But in order to really, I think, move forward through your journey, you have to take that same intentionality and put it into, who do you want to be as a leader? And you can't think soon enough about what the leadership legacy you want to leave than when you start your career. And don't be afraid to ask yourself that big question, because if you do that, it'll continue to steer your true north through your entire journey. Not that it won't change. It will. Trust me. What I thought when I was 25 is a lot different as I get closer to 60 today. But that, had I been able to do that earlier in my career, I think I'd be even stronger than where I am today.
Wow. Wonderful insights. Chris, I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, my honor. Thanks for making the ask.
All right, folks, that's it for this episode of Amplified, the Leadership Student 2.0 podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Amplified, the Leadership Student 2.0 podcast. If you're ready to elevate your personal leadership and drive your team's success, connect with Apogee Global RMS for custom coaching and development solutions. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode of impactful personal leadership strategies. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and empowering those around you. Together, we'll amplify your success